talking about cloud computing, and that's going to be about half the talk, and the rest will be about various topics, how you can improve your practices in IT. Hopefully you learned something new. And it's geared generally towards LSPs of small to mid-size. So if you have more than 100 employees, then probably you already do these things, I hope. And it's probably not going to be so much worth it. There's, like I mentioned, the software in the cloud versus in-house. First topic, we're going to be talking about IT documentation, about improving IT performance and how you can measure it, and about IT security risks. That's a huge topic, and I'll try to give you some ideas of how to better categorize that and identify the true dangers and really not waste time on things that don't matter. So what is the cloud? It's on the most basic level, it's software, hardware that's delivered via the internet, meaning, well, it's outsourced, so it's hosted with a different company. Your data is not in your own offices. There's different types of cloud computing, and really we'll be talking only about one of those. There's, on the left, the server hardware, so if you just rent a server somewhere online, that's already called cloud computing. You could also rent a whole server environment where you already have pre-configured, say, a database or other kind of software on that server. And what's most commonly referred to as the cloud is software as a service. And that's when you basically rent the software and everything's done for you. You just pay the monthly or yearly fee, and you basically don't have any IT effort on that software. So just to compare that with a traditional IT setup where you have an in-house software, you first have to buy it. You have to buy the hardware, have to decide on a server, install it with the operating system, install the software, install licenses, constantly install updates, take care that a lot of backups are made, take care that you have backup server hardware, so if the primary server crashes, you can still run the software. So that's a lot of expenditure, and it's costing people a lot of time. It's often underestimated. So many people just look at the license cost of some in-house product and just are very, very optimistic when thinking about how much time will actually be needed to run that in-house. So in contrast, software as a service is just monthly fee, usually per user, very predictable, very easy. So I'll be talking a bit about some differences between those. What are the benefits and drawbacks of each approach? And it's kind of generalizations, because it's always a little bit dependent on the individual software. There's software in the cloud that behaves a bit more like in-house and vice versa, but these are general rules. With the in-house IT setup, you get control over your data. You get, well, first of all, I think in most people's minds, it's the control of knowing that no one's abusing your data. Like, everyone's afraid of, if I give my data to Google, what they're going to do with it. If that's a rational fear or not, it's up to debate, and it's really something we could talk for many hours. And but I'm not going to do that. So that's that. What are they going to do? That? Are they going to analyze it? Are they going to be confidential with it? What's going to happen with my data? In the cloud, the main, I think most of you will be aware of that. If you have a cloud software, it's just much more simple. You just sign up usually and get going much, much faster. You have the flexibility of, say, you're growing very rapidly, you want to add new users with the cloud. You just add the user licenses and you're good to go. While with an in-house setup, you talk to your IT people and they tell you, we need a new server. It's going to take months, I'm too busy. So these kind of things can happen. Another thing that really is different in both is the customizability of the software. Typically with in-house software, let's say SDL Trados or MemoQ, I count those as in-house software. You have the opportunity to get under the hood. If something goes wrong in MemoQ, you can do things you're not really supposed to do to fix things. Probably not you, but the IT person working on it, of course. So you really have more control, more customizability. Also, in-house software is often traditionally much more customizable per se, yet you have much more options in the software. Versus the cloud, many cloud offerings are kind of, they give you the approach that works 80% of the time for 80% of the people, and you kind of have to live with that. And it's usually very well thought out, so you have to see what works for you. With in-house IT, also can usually more easily integrate with the legacy software you have. So if you already have old software in-house, you can usually integrate that easier if you buy more in-house software. With the cloud software, you also get integration, but a different kind. So with in-house software, you usually integrate with in-house software. The cloud software, you integrate with cloud software. So one big benefit of cloud computing is that you buy into a whole ecosystem of applications. So you start, let's say, with one cloud application like Salesforce, and then you realize there's dozens or even hundreds of applications already there connected to it. So so integrating with different applications in practice often becomes very easy in the cloud. So that's a really nice thing to have. In terms of cost, it's of course very individual to the softwares, but generally with in-house software, you pay a larger license fee in the beginning. You have a lot of setup costs, but over time it gets less and less. You just pay the update fee. So it's a question of do you want to invest in it long term? Is it a software you're going to use in 5 years' time? Are you sure of that? Then very often there's actually good cost savings in the in-house IT setup. It of course depends on your cash flow considerations as well, if you want to spend more now or later. With the cloud, it's all, in contrast, very predictable. You have that monthly fee. You pay as you go. You pay per user. And that predictability is really a nice thing because you really know, you can calculate your budget quite well. While with in-house software, you more often get surprises. So, and with the cloud, it's not a general rule. Sometimes you can save money, plain as that. So some services are just, even over many years, cheaper than in-house. So these are the results of a study and adoption of software as a service conducted in Europe in company sizes, not the really big players, so it's pretty relevant, I would say, to this audience. So it's companies up to 1,000 employees. And in this study, the companies were first rated for IT effectiveness. So how effective is their internal IT? How happy are users with the systems that they get? How reliable are they running, and so on. And those are rated into these three categories here. So the upper graph is the companies with a high IT effectiveness, and the lower graph is with the low IT effectiveness. And there's two things we can learn from that. First of all, I think you don't see that very well here on the screen because the colors kind of mesh up, but there's the high effective companies, they're not using SaaS exclusively. So they're taking an approach of we use whatever works best in an environment. So and in the low effectiveness, there's actually the most companies that say we only use software as a service. So clearly that's not the strategy to go. But also, secondly, the most effective IT usually uses more software as a service than the ones that are less effective. So in terms of benefits that people want or expect from software as a service, not surprisingly, the cost is a really big driver here. And key factor for many people is being able to do new stuff more easily. I think that's a really nice summing up. If you really want to be flexible, and especially for smaller companies that grow and don't really know, am I going to do the same thing in 2 or 3 years? It's really, really compelling to use software as a service because you can so much easier switch your investment. And as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of doubts. You're the exception, I think. From my experience, a lot of people are very much concerned about trust. basically you see in this graph, you see what are people concerned about, what is their decision criteria there. And it's mostly about security, backups, what is else? It's like disaster recovery and, you know, the contract terms. Is there a good SLA, service level agreement? So it's all about trust. Boils down to, like, do I trust another company to do a better job as I do? And many people answer that with no. So, but it's something you have to decide for yourself. So just to sum up the pros and cons here for in-house IT, if you integrate with, if you need to integrate with an existing software environment in-house, then probably in-house IT, especially if you're using open source products, is a better match. If you need to customize and extend it very much, if it's part of your core business as well, that's something I'd really think hard about. If it's the central part of your business, like for example the translation, the CAT tool, having that in the cloud is tricky because you get less control. And in my opinion, is with the software that's core to your business, you want control because you innovate in that area. If you want to invest long term, if you know you're going to keep doing this and the software you're convinced it will work for you, then invest long term, get in-house. Strict legal requirements are an issue for some people. Some people just can't use the cloud because they have agreements with their clients that tell them they need to have everything in-house. All the data, all the client's data needs to stay in-house, so that it's not even an option. Of course, you'd have to control the entire supply chain to do that, so it's kind of a tricky thing to do, especially in terms of security. That's a really challenging subject if you actually have clients like that. If you have doubts about the vendor's reliability, of course, then about a SaaS vendor's reliability, then I would definitely go for an in-house. And the most important thing you need is a professional IT team for in-house software, because you run a big risk if it's not being managed correctly. And a lot of LSPs have just one in-house IT person, and that person is basically managing himself. So I would say that's a danger. If you as a managing director have an interest in IT yourself and can supervise that, I would say that's a better situation. But if you don't, then it's really not really that well possible to have a professional IT team if you don't have proper management for it. So if these arguments here make sense for you, then I would say in-house makes sense for you as well. The cloud, in contrast, has different benefits in that you, like I mentioned, if you want to pay as you go, if you want to stay nimble and flexible in the whole software setup, if you want to grow fast, and if you want to secure your data, then cloud is a good idea. And for securing your data, the background behind that is that at first, intuitively for many people, it seems more secure to have a server in your office. But then if you think about it, many people have that like literally under a desk or maybe in a so-called server room, you know, lots of things can happen to that server. While if you're hosted with Google, and many, well, that's an example, but many, I mean, I would say all the good software as a service providers host their applications in a much more secure environment. So central concern for many people is trust in another company doing better than you can yourself, as I mentioned, and not abusing their power in some way. I'm not hearing concerns from you about this, but I've heard that a lot before from other people. A lot of people are just kind of not really very happy about the idea that someone else has access to their data in any way. Maybe it's a German thing, I don't know. I mean, the Germans resisted the Google Street View very fiercely as well, so maybe it's just us. And for small companies, I think it's a huge chance using software as a service products. Like I said, maybe not the translation industry products, even though there might be some good ones there, but for services that are not core to your business, like email. Email is a good example. It's like every business in the world has email. there's no real reason to do that in-house anymore, because you can get it cheaply by another provider. And same goes for things like sales management, Salesforce. Why would you host that in-house? Unless sometimes you have a good reason for it, but anyway, it's just such a general problem that so many companies have that it's usually just because of the scalability of the whole scale. 30? Great. It's actually can be very cost effective. Okay, and in my mind, the biggest benefit of it to be agile and be able to change systems more quickly. Next up is structured documentation, and that's about, well, why would I do documentation in IT? I think there's some obvious reasons for that, why people want to do that, and some less obvious ones. I'm going to give you some hints about that, how to implement that in the company I used to work for, where my background is in having managed an IT department in LSP for a long time. And when we introduced that, it really helped us in so many ways, so I want to share that a bit. So why would we bother with documenting everything, all the process in IT, or for that matter, any other department in your company? It's not just IT, but I'm talking about IT here. So it costs us time. We have to write it all the time. And the biggest thing, it's a pain. I mean, most people don't really like writing about everything they do. It's not so much fun. Obvious benefits, of course, staff turnover, staff holidays. That's just clear to everyone. But I think there's more. Well, in preparing for growth, meaning that if you need to train new people, a nice and easy way is just to tell them to read the manual, read the documentation, and they're well prepared. The less obvious benefit of documentation is that you can expect some benefits in how people work. In my experience, if I write about something, I make sure that it makes sense. It makes sure that if someone else reads it, it doesn't shed a bad light on me in some way. So I think about it a bit more, try to make it a little bit more clean, and that's a great benefit for the company, after all. And finally, it doesn't actually take that much time. It just feels like a lot of time because it's such a pain. So, but I always say just measure how much time you actually spend, and it's not much. It's really not much. So the documentation website, you need a website to put that documentation on. I'd recommend a wiki. You probably all know a Wikipedia. That's basically is a website that anyone with the proper permissions can edit. So it's really easy to handle. You just go on that website, click on edit, and then you can edit, and you have a structure to it. And a structure is important. If you have a good structure for that, it's so much easier to work with it. Also, you probably don't want your IT people to use the same password for every service. I hope I don't have to explain why that's a bad idea. So a password database is a very good idea to use that, meaning you have a secure master password, and behind that is everything, all the passwords in your company. Maybe a bit more surprisingly, a technical writing training for IT staff. And I'm not talking about a day's training or something like that. I'm talking about more like 10 minutes or 30 minutes training, just to give them a little start and how to approach this. Because that's what I learned. A lot of people, you tell them to document something and they're like, yeah, I'll do it. But then they don't start it, and you find out it's really because they really don't know how to do it properly. So it doesn't apply to everyone, of course, but a lot of people have that. Okay, and a to-do list, basically, what do you need to be documented? That's something you definitely need. And a carrot and or stick for the IT team, meaning whatever you prefer. So, but there needs to be some incentive or some way to get people to actually start doing it regularly, because otherwise you get excuses all the time. A possible documentation structure, one we've been using that worked for us very well. It's pretty simple. Basically, on that wiki page that's accessible to the staff, There's two sections, one which is only for the IT staff, and you could do that for other departments as well. But so you only have one section only for the IT staff, one section that's available for everyone. And in the section for the IT staff, you basically divide instructions, things that need to be, how do you do certain things, how do you configure certain things, how do you fix problems. And then you have a documentation of the status. So what servers do we have, what computers do we have, where are they physically located, how do I get to them, what's on them, what hardware is it, so all the details about them. And what we found really helpful is to have a disaster recovery section. So your IT person, well, if you have one IT person, that's really bad. If you have multiple, it's not so bad. But if you have one and he's leaving for holidays and something happens and you just have maybe a halfway decent tech person available who then needs to fix the server, then it's a really nice thing to have, to not need to search through all the documentation and look through all the rooms, where's that server again, and instead just know, okay, this is failing and this is how we proceed to fix that. The documentation software that you can use for that, I'm going to give you some names of software that can be used for that at the end of the talk. And if you have trouble writing the notes, all of them, it's a lot of data on the slides, you can just drop me a card here and I send you the presentation. So documentation software should be web-based, ideally, so everyone can access it, and ideally it would also be hosted externally. Software as a service is really nice in that way, because if the server crashes that the documentation is on, well, you're screwed. How do you know how to restore the server if the documentation, how to do it, was on it? So chicken and egg kind of problem. It should have a hierarchical page structure so you can properly structure it. You can look at this not only as an IT tool, but it's also something that can be used by other departments as well. In my experience in the LSP, we started in the IT and then it expanded through the whole company, and now it's just documented everything. And when a certification was done for the company, they basically just had to look in the documentation and they had the certificate. So that's a really nice preparation for this kind of challenge. Should have detailed access control so you can set correctly who's able to access what, and it should be convenient to use. And all the recommendation that I will be making will fulfill these requirements. So now for the little writing course. It's a really simple system. It's deceptively simple, but it has worked well for me over the years. It's some simple questions that people can ask themselves if they write about something in the let's say they write about how a certain software is configured. They first think about who am I writing for? Am I writing for people that have some IT knowledge or not? If I write for different people, I divide it into different topics, different sections of the page. Then I think about what are the likely questions that people will have? What kind of tasks will people want to accomplish? Those are the headers, quite simply. So I start with the headers, then add context information if it's not really clear what that means, and finally just do a bullet point step by step for each header. Like I said, it's really simple, but keep people going. Next one is about true security dangers. Not sure if that's the typical picture that you have in mind of a danger, but could be. So I'll just give you a little bit of a overview of what kind of, how to think about security. And well, that's really something. Security is all about prioritization. You got to look at what kind of attacks are there, what kind of possible damage is there, what can I do about it. So in even a lot of IT people's minds, it's just really fuzzy. They have a huge list of things they think could be dangerous, and sometimes there's some inertia that nothing gets done in that way. So you have three types of attackers, basically. There's the professionals, where, say, professionals you can't really defend against because there's so many security holes in today's IT world. It's almost impossible to do that. Apple security is one example that manages to do that. I mean, they keep their iPhone secret pretty well. It's pretty amazing how they do that. So, as I mentioned, the professional hackers is not, they're hard to defend against, but they're basically, that's industry espionage, and that's something that I won't be talking about so much because if you really are in danger of that, it is very hard to defend against, and it's beyond the scope of what I can talk about here. Company insiders could be both. They could sell your data, or they could just be mad at you and delete all your files. Or other kinds of attackers, spammers, fraudsters, or bored kids on the internet that just randomly attack people just to use them for their own evil means or whatever. There's many, many cases. The point is really, for me, that the industry espionage is something we can, as small companies, hardly defend against because there's basically, if someone really wants to get your data, there's so many loopholes. Unless you have a really professional IT team and spend a lot of money on it, they will get in. Like even your wireless network, the way you dial into the office with the virtual private network, is just all pretty open, unfortunately. So it's also not a frequent risk because I think it's not happening very often that people actually want to steal your data and do something with it. It's much more frequent that people that you have for example, viruses coming in, but not really targeting you specifically. So it's more about the broad attacks. The leak of own data is mostly not critical. Maybe, I'm not sure if you agree with that, but my opinion is when I imagine as an LSP company, my core asset, let's say my sales contact database, if that is leaked to a competitor, it's probably not going to kill me, and it's probably not even do a lot of damage because there's not so much things they can do with it. On the other hand, if someone would break into my computer network and delete the entire server hard drive and I don't have a backup, that would be real damage that could really put me out of business. So vandalism is something that I will be focusing on because it's high risk, it's a high damage potential, and it's relatively easy to defend against. This is just a sample list of what are often the most vulnerable services in a company. Of course, the key takeaways that I would recommend everyone to go back to your IT manager or IT person and ask them, do a priority list of what you think in our company is the most vulnerable, and then let them work on it. Solve a few of them every year, and you slowly get to it. But the key point is to prioritize. Email passwords and technology is very vulnerable and very, well, it's pretty bad if it happens because the email is your master key. I mean, it's also important privately. If someone gets into your email, he gets into all other services. And that's what happens in the article that he mentioned. And that journalist, someone got his Apple and Gmail account, and then I think what happened actually was that the email account gave the hackers access to remote wipe his MacBook. So like everything was gone because they got into the email. That's really dangerous. Outdated software. If you have in-house software and it's not properly maintained, it might be that easy to get into that software. So if you have something that's on the internet, accessible on the internet, that's where I would focus. Insecure wireless networks and VPNs, as I mentioned, wireless and VPN, I mentioned that when you remote dial into your office, it's just easily hackable. Most technologies by professionals, can be hacked in a day or less. So it's really a quick thing for professionals, or even, it's not even that hard. It's not like you need to be, Secret Service kind of person. It's more like, yeah, you got to know a bit about computers. So the most important action I would recommend on a general basis, like I said, I would customize that for your company. Encrypted access to emails, that's basics that some people still don't have. I would definitely ask your team people to check that. If there should be some enforcement on email passwords, it shouldn't be the first name, for starters. A lot of people do that. And so ideally have some service that enforces good passwords. And if you use a cloud service, that's often part of it. Regular updates to all the software in the internet is important. You could encrypt notebook hard disk, secure VPN access. That's there's a lot of points that I could go endless about that, but those are important. If you have an iPhone or a tablet where you have access to your company data, make sure you know how to remote wipe it if you lose it, so you can lock it and make sure that no one gets on it. I mean, that's so easy. A lot of people don't even lock their phone, so I find the phone, I can just go at it. And the most important of all is, in case something happens, have some good backups. And with non-corruptible backups, I mean that if the hacker gets in, that he's not able to delete the backups as well. So don't just put it on an external hard drive and then leave that on the computer. That won't help much. So improving in IT, I have a couple of ideas about that. Well, actually I have a lot of ideas, but just give you the most effective tool that I found, and that's using a support ticket system. Support ticket means you have a central email address like support@yourcompanyname.com, and all the emails requesting support go there. And the benefit of that is that the IT staff, if you have multiple people, they can assign it to different people, and they have it like a to-do list. So it's not like just an email inbox, but you actually have a to-do list, and things, before they aren't done, they don't go away. So no one can forget it, which is a frequent problem in IT, especially if it's inconvenient problems. So these requests are all centrally archived. And by the way, there's really not much excuse to not use it because they're very cheap and easy to set up. And I think the biggest benefit of using that kind of system is that, well, I'm asking for some empathy for IT people. Typical IT person, when he comes into the office and tries to get to his desk, has like 3 people calling him from their offices, and I just recalled, can you do this and that for me? And so that's the day of the typical IT person, that they just don't have really concentrated time to get to work on the important things. Well, you could say the same about project managers and all kinds of people, but with the IT people, you can help them. So with that kind of system, they get to control their own time. So they can they control their own schedule. So they get it in there, they can prioritize themselves, and actually reserve a few hours a day to work on important things. So they have less excuse to not get things done that you agreed with them in the yearly planning. Other possible improvements in IT I would suggest is, like I mentioned before, only solve the industry-specific issues in-house. Just always, if you're thinking about buying a new server, installing a new software in-house, do it with the things that matter. If it's something that can be outsourced, it's oftentimes much more effective. And like I mentioned, my recommendation is only keep the things critical to your business and specific to your business in-house. Something of a standard strategy in IT, which big companies all do, but many small companies don't, is that they all have identical computers in the network. And it's kind of a conflict between business and the IT staff, because in business you want to buy computers as you grow and just buy one computer at a time and not buy so much at the same time. But if you do buy identical PCs for the people and identical hardware. That might be a bigger one-time investment, but it makes life for the IT so much easier. It saves, actually, in my experience, a lot of time. So you have a standard configuration for all the PCs in the office, and you can just have a backup PC. And it improves the whole experience of, if let's say, a project manager computer crashes. Like for many people, it would be, okay, you need to buy a new PC, worst case, or okay, I'm going to give you that other PC that's over there and reconfigure it and make it work for you. And the ideal way would be to just say, oh, I have this readily configured standard over here. Let me put it at your desk. And there you go. So for measuring IT performance, that goes hand in hand with the other suggestions I had earlier. If you have a support ticket system, you actually get the benefit of being able to report on how long does it take until an issue is resolved by the IT team, or even how long they take to answer it. So you can monitor that well. If you have a documentation policy, you can do spot checks on a regular basis about that. And one thing I'd always recommend for IT is doing surveys. Just a simple survey once in a year asking everyone how is the performance. I mean, when I ask questions to the IT, am I helped in a good way? Am I helped fast? Do I have some suggestions and so on? So do that once a year, and that also helps in measuring how they do. Of course, there's lots of other things how one could measure, but those are very dependent on the goals that you have for a given year. But these are some things you can do every year and keep evaluating the performance over time. This is a bit of software that I recommend. For doing documentation in-house, I would recommend really to use Atlassian Confluence. It's a SaaS-based product, and they actually have a starter plan. I don't remember, but I think you get 5 users or so for almost nothing. So if it's just the IT department accessing it, it goes for a long time. Really, it's a very mature product, very well thought out. So that's very quickly set up. The other product for documentation, MindTouch Enterprise Wiki, is a bit more hard to set up, but it's open source, so you can get it for free. They both work fine in my experience. For support ticket systems, there's multiple options. Zendesk also has a plan, I think 3 people, so if you have an IT team that's not going to grow beyond 3 people in the near future or foreseeable future, then that's a good option. It's also very, very, very affordable. It gets suddenly very, very pricey if you go beyond 3 people, so be warned. It's like €50 per person then per month. So it's kind of ridiculous, yeah, especially if you're not using it much. But does anyone here have an IT team larger than 3 people? Right, so you'll probably not be affected. Freshdesk and HelpSpot are also other options. Freshdesk is cheaper for larger teams, and HelpSpot is, you can do it in-house if you like to. Okay, so as I have a little bit more time, I can talk about password databases. That's, I know it's not a very exciting topic to most people, but it's something that can be a huge time saver once you get started with it. It's both more secure if you have a central database, but also saves you as a user so much headache. You just have to remember one password, have everything in there, and it's usually very easy to use. So it's like, the browsers usually save the password automatically. I mean, they offer the option to save the password, but that's not secure. So that's something I would not recommend, and I think any good IT team wouldn't allow that because it really means that anyone gets access to the computer, they have access to everything. So with the password database, you get convenience features that you just enter one password and go. And if you're up for software as a service, I would recommend LastPass. That's really kind of tough decision if you really want to put all your passwords, even all your passwords, in a remote, on a different company server. But the technology is sound; they don't actually have access to your passwords, so only you can decrypt it. But I know it's kind of a trust issue. So KeePass for many people is more, it's an open source, it's local. No other company gets access to it, so it might work better.